Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's conversation was one that I feel like we keep having, but we need to keep having until we see change in this space. So today's conversation is dedicated to Black History Month, and the theme for this year is Standing Firm in Power and Pride. And this conversation is about confronting inequities in social finance for Black communities. I really wanted us to have a discussion exploring how systemic injustice has historically and presently shaped access to capital, to investment and economic mobility for Black communities. I wanted to take a look at the pride, resilience and innovation within Black-led enterprises and community organizations, what it means to stand firm in our expertise, our solutions and our right to equitable financial systems, and finally, practical pathways to a future where inclusive finance is not aspirational but is the standard. So today I am joined by an amazing panel, and I'm so grateful to you all for joining and for being part of this conversation. So I would like to welcome Georgina Wilson, CEO of Bud Leaders, Amy Gutcher, CFO of Sumerian Partners, and Muna Yassin, CEO of Rooted Finance. Now, there's a couple of things that I'm really proud of with this panel. Firstly, I'm really grateful that we've got some dynamic women in this space really affecting change in this area. But before we get stuck into the questions, I'd love it if I could get each of you just to give listeners a brief introduction into who you are and the work that you do. So Georgina, if we could start with you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Real pleasure if I can speak to begin with. But real pleasure to be here. I'm Georgina Wilson. I'm the founder and the CEO of Bud Leaders. We support Black and global majority businesses to access more through a variety of different ways, but really focused on finance, on networks, on creating more opportunities for supply chains and in building leadership skills. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Amy, could you give everyone a brief intro into who you are and what you do, please?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see everybody today. My name's Amy. I'm the CFO at Sumerian. We're a social investor, so impact-first investor. We've, at first unintentionally, but now very much intentionally, have an EDI focus. So we look to do social investment to small, growing social enterprises in the UK, irrespective of impact area. It's helping small social enterprises grow.
Amazing, thank you. And last but by no means least, Muna Yassin, MBE, over to you, please.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here, and I'm the CEO of Rooted Finance. Rooted Finance is a specialist grassroots community embedded debt advice and financial inclusion charity. We support people end to end with debt advice and financial difficulties from diverse ethnic communities, and have been delivering across London for over 20 years.
Amazing, thank you. All right, so let's get stuck into the questions. So the theme for Black History Month, like I mentioned earlier, is standing firm in power and pride. I'd love it if each of you could share in your own words, what does that mean to you, both personally or professionally or both, especially in the context of social finance. So Georgina, if you could go first, please.
Yeah, there's a few things in this that really stood out to me, and one of which is about just standing. I think within this space, there are still lots of barriers that Black and global majority businesses face around social investment and accessing finance. But there's something really important about just standing, just actually standing and not giving up. And there's something about taking a stance and saying, actually, regardless of the barriers that we face, we're just going to stand. And in that stance, there is power. And in that stance, there is pride of actually, who we are and what we have achieved that we haven't been able to, I guess, realize in this space.
Absolutely. Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I'm echoing a little bit of that, but picking out in particular, I think that's very standing firm. I think the way that it feels at the moment when you look not just in the UK but globally, it's a real test of resilience right now about and feeling confident to persevere and stand firm. So when it comes to social finance, it's almost like it's now more than ever has it been important to hold true, because there's so much, it's so easy to get knocked off course now. And if we don't stand firm now, then it's not going to work, and we're not going to build on everything that's already been done. So it's standing firm.
No, absolutely. I think, there's that piece about like now more than ever. I feel like over the last 6 to 8 months, we've taken so many steps back in this work. And, the theme for this year is so poignant for that reason. Muna, over to you. What are your thoughts?
I'd just like to say, having gone third, I agree with everything that's been said prior to me speaking. But I will pick out power in that statement, because for me, I think there's something around our collective power and as a people, and how much fear there is around actually us having power as a community. And I think once we recognize that actually the link between money and power, finance and power, and what that therefore represents, then we understand why there's such a resistance. So it's what for me really stands out from that statement, including everything that Georgina and Amy have said.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think we've seen, and history has definitely told us, that there is that fear of actually, if we give to some extent, if we give Black communities these resources, what could they achieve? And therefore, actually, are we comfortable with that? So no, thank you for that. So this is to Muna and Georgina. From your lived and professional experience, what are the most persistent inequities that Black communities face when it comes to accessing capital and investment? And where are the hidden barriers that often go unspoken?
You want to go, Mina?
Yeah, happy to take that. And I think I take this from a personal finance perspective always, because of the work that we do, but also you could add that across the spectrum. I think there are lots of areas where people feel they are, I would say, visible, but not visible at the same time. So they're hyper visible, but at the same time, their needs are completely invisible. So lots of our clients will say to us, well, actually, I feel like I'm being treated in a certain way, or decisions are being made in a certain way because of who I am. But then the flip side to that is the products that are available aren't designed for me, weren't built for me, and they don't understand me. So I think there is something around understanding actually what that does to people's ability to actually engage with the financial services sector and the finance sector, and where that retreat happens and where people retreat to, and what some of those financial behaviors that we're not understanding, how we could capitalize those, to use a better word, and use them in a way that actually makes people feel much more empowered, much more included, but also make economical sense, right? So whole subsection of the population that have purchasing power, have aspirations, have financial clout, but it's not being met and somebody else is meeting it. So the question is, how do we go to where they are?
Yeah, definitely. Georgina, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on some really important points, Muna, around that sort of education piece and understanding, which is a huge barrier that we found as well. And I think, I talked about this at a recent talk, and it was basically, we don't have this conversation in our household. The most I understood about money was when I randomly came across my mum's little red book that she used to use for for the bank, and I said, well, what is that? And she said, oh, it's savings. That's it. That's as far as the went. So there's something about the lack of understanding and education about how to actually leverage finance, and actually we tend to run away from debt. I think within our culture, it's like, you never take a loan, like, don't take debt, you know, this is the worst possible thing that you could do. Whereas many other cultures are leveraging it to the sky and are creating legacies for their household. So it's really that education piece, but also I think there's something around the networks as well. So, you know, if you're able to reach out to, you know, cousin Joe or, you know, Uncle Tom or whatever it is, to be able to have those kind of in conversations and get, you know, an introduction and things like that is completely different to trying to navigate this world on your own. This whole kind of social investment sphere is one that's a bit of a beast. And even, you know, we got social investment within the organisation I run, but I had absolutely no idea what, like, all of the different things were, all of the different models and so forth. And, you know, why didn't I have access to that? I was running a really good business, but yeah, there's many barriers. And that's what we're trying to work to dismantle, I guess. In
Definitely. I think that network piece is so important as well, because I remember when I first started kind of submitting tenders for contracts, and I'd always get, like, you know, rejections, but never any feedback as to how I could have made it better. And it wasn't until I engaged with someone who was actually a bid writer, and they reviewed a bid that I was about to submit, gave me some amazing feedback, and I submitted that. I didn't win, I came second, and I was gassed. I was really gassed. But it's those kinds of conversations that help us to access these spaces. And I think the same would definitely go for accessing grant funding, etc., because those grant applications are no joke. They are absolutely no joke. So this question is to Amy. As a senior leader and ally in finance, what patterns or biases have you seen in the sector that perpetuate these inequities? And how can allies go beyond acknowledgement to actively dismantle these barriers?
Yeah, I mean, actually, Georgina already touched on quite a bit of there are many barriers, but I just picked out a few that I see. A lot of it, it's not about the money. At the end of the day, whether it's grant funding or it's investment or whatever, we just talk about money, right? But the problem is that the systems are set up such that we think that we're just solving the money part, but we're not solving the knowledge and the empowerment and the networks and the policy and the whole ecosystem. So I think we're still therefore got a problem when it comes to social finance, that you can't just add on diversity. So I think the sector understands how critical diversity is, and that's good, because at least we've got the acknowledgement. But we need to, you know, if we're going to sort of go beyond that and actually dismantle the barriers, you've got to kind of look at the whole system. You can't just take one bit and say, oh, well, we're going to just make sure that there's more money for a particular group. That's not work, because to Georgina's point, you know, if you're offering money, but you're doing it in the same old way that, you know, for some groups would be, you know, debt, bad debt, that's loan sharks. It's not for me. So we're not going to make any change in this. We've still got the same systems. So I think in terms of what the sector can do next, it's actually like taking a step back, looking at the whole system, all of the processes, all of the behaviours that exist there, and just really looking at it, because we often sort of like, we make so many assumptions. If you just started with a blank piece of paper, I think we would probably make a lot more progress, but it's going to take some courage.
And I think that's such an important word. Is it is going to take some courage. I know I did a piece of work. Derek is on the call. He's chair at Tudor Trust, and like some of the work that Tudor, and Georgina is also a trustee at Tudor. Shout out to Tudor. But Tudor are definitely kind of exemplifying what it looks like to be courageous in grant giving. So if anyone on the call is new to kind of Tudor's work, please do check them out and support where you can. But they are absolutely amazing, and I think they're definitely leading the way for organizations who kind of need that infusion of courage, or even just a guide as to how to get started in a courageous way in this work. So thank you, Amy. So this question is to Muna and Georgina again. How have these inequities shown up in the work you do with entrepreneurs, communities, and grassroots organizations? And can you share a moment that illustrates the human impact of systemic barriers in finance?
Georgina, you want to take this one and then I'll come in?
Sure, absolutely. So it's really interesting. I was actually at a graduation event for one of our programs, which was really amazing. And the organizations there got to pitch in front of like really sort of prestigious businesses. And I was really blown away. I was like rooting for them. They were doing so well. And then it got to the bit at the end where you ask for the commitment. And every single one asked for way less than what they were worth. And I mean, I was so proud, but I was so saddened at that point, and it was a recurring thing. And I just recognized that there's so many layers to systemic racism that cause great innovative businesses to not have the audacity to even ask for what they're worth. And I'm grappling with this myself as well. So I'm quite bold and I can ask for things, but I recognize that I'm still not able to ask enough. And so I'm overcoming this, but I think that feels like a big barrier, that even though there's a need, even though there's credibility, even though all of those things exist, culturally, we can't seem to get the enough confidence to be able to ask for what is required and what we're worth.
No, absolutely. Muna, is there anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think that last point Georgina makes is a really interesting one, because I think it comes back to that education piece. So I think there is a cultural mindset around us that actually asking for something is charity when it's not. I think what we think about is how we change that mindset from a handout to actually a negotiation. And understanding what your value is and being able to negotiate effectively as to what you are pricing yourself at or pricing your service at, and being able to be bold around actually making sure that people understand that you are worth what you say you're worth, right? And I think that's definitely an education piece. I think from our side, what we see a lot of is people actually exploited for their situations and that lack of knowledge. So we have recently launched a piece of work called Equity in Finance, which is looking at the barriers and inequalities within financial services for the experiences of minority and ethnic communities. And we've been working with our lived experience steering committee. And so we've been kind of taking things and presenting it to them and kind of understanding what their thoughts are around some of the issues that we're looking at. And one of the things that struck me is the realization that actually everything they thought was happening is actually happening. They weren't being gaslit, and they weren't effectively just putting it down to microaggressions and sweeping it under the carpet. Actually, there is data to back up what they have suspected around having to pay more for their car insurance, having to pay more for their loans, and having more people of colour decline for their loans in comparison to the wider population. All of the things that they have suspected are actually there in black and white. So that realisation actually brought a sense of relief, and that then galvanised them to start thinking, well, what can we do about it? And how can we do something about it? So I think there is something around exposing the issue and making sure that people are fully aware. And I think thinking about that word courageousness, I think for me, it's not courageous to be equitable and to be fair, right? I think it should be a given. And I think some of these organizations that we are talking about sometimes think that It is something that we are asking for, and in actual fact, it belongs to all of us, and it's about how you redistribute it in a fair and equitable way.
Yeah.
So I think that for me really stands out.
Definitely. Georgina, we spoke a while back and you were talking about one of the things that really drove you to do this work is just the number of Black women, for example, who are unable to do their weekly shop because they just don't have money to fund their business, essentially, and they're literally, I wouldn't even call it bootstrapped at the moment. Like it's down to the bare minimum, but they're still trying to sustain their businesses. And the biggest challenge for them is accessing finance. And I think for me, that's what really stands out as the human impact of these systemic barriers in finance, is the impact that it has on livelihoods and homes and families. And for me, that's one of the most significant reasons why this work needs to be done and why we need to affect this change that we're asking for. Amy, how do you use your position to open doors or shift? So I'm going to ask you this question, Amy, but then I've got to jump in with an example of my experience of how you've done this, and then I'll get you to answer the question if that's okay, just because I want to big you up a little bit. So the question is, how do you use your position to open doors or shift mindsets in spaces where Black voices are absent or underrepresented? So I'll actually get you to answer first, and then I will give the example.
And then you'll pick me up.
Yes.
Look, it's kind of funny for me because and I sit here, like on the screen, I can see I'm sitting between two CEOs, and I'm actually the CEOs, and I'm CFO. So I've always viewed myself as a back office, second in command, deputy kind of person. I never really felt that I had a voice, and so it's more of a recent realization for me that I do have a voice, and that I do therefore have the ability to, like you say, open doors and champion people, which, there's a joy to being, that's a privileged position to be in. And I don't take it for granted. If I've got the opportunity to showcase somebody, then that's what I want to do. But I kind of feel like for the whole sector that is an important thing. I guess I'm going to build on what Muna was saying about it's not necessarily, courage isn't necessarily a word, maybe it's trust. And that if you are in a position where you have any ability to open any door, then you have to be the one who takes the first step to do that. So you need to be able to do that. At the end of the day, for social finance, what we should be measured on is the impact that we're having, and the power to have that impact lies with the social entrepreneur. It's not with me at all. So, it's not about me. It's definitely about those organisations, those people who I can open the doors for. But yeah, so I think it's about like proactively, intentionally trying to do those things and recognising when you do have power, because not everybody's used to having it. But if you do have it, you need to use it. It is a responsibility to do that.
No, definitely. Thank you, Amy. And I definitely see, when you got some people that kind of talk the talk but don't walk the walk. Amy is without a doubt someone who walks the walk, and I think Georgina would agree because Georgina works quite closely with Amy. But my experience of where you've kind of shifted mindsets and helped to kind of lift me is when I first pulled together my seed funding pack for my inclusive AI platform, and I was like, Amy, I've got this idea, and I'd love to pitch it to you. And you're like, I can't support you because we don't help startups, but I can definitely give you some feedback and point you in the right direction and stuff. And I remember doing that pitch for you and your colleague and leaving that call feeling like the bee's knees. I was like, I've got this down. Like I listened to, don't get me wrong, I'm still scared, but I left the call feeling like, actually, I know what I'm talking about. I can do this. The feedback was really positive. It was constructive. And you gave me advice on where to go next. And I think it sounds so small, but the impact that can have on, Black business owners and business owners from the global majority who maybe don't have people like that they can speak to should never be underrated. So I would personally like to say a massive thank you to you for that, because you didn't have to do it and you did it anyway. So thank you.
I enjoyed your pitch actually, so it was very memorable.
Yeah, amazing. So this is a question for all of you. Despite these systemic barriers that we've talked through, Black-led businesses and organizations continue to innovate and succeed. What are some examples of power, resilience, and ingenuity that you've seen in your work? And I'll start with you, please, Muna.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting to us is obviously we're working with people at the other end of the financial scale. So people who have maybe started a business, it's gone wrong, and we're unpicking some of the, I think Georgina, you were talking about the interconnectedness between personal finances and business finances. So supporting people to unpick all of that, but then also understanding what their aspirations are. So many of them have clear ideas about what they want to do. It's about making sure that we, if we're able to, and they're in that position, connecting them with the right business support, the right opportunities around funding going forward. But I think for me, the biggest thing is around how much of Black and minority communities are entrepreneurial, and the amount of side hustles that are going on, the amount of shipping that's happening all across the world, aunties selling traditional clothes.
Yeah,
we've got our hustle on, but actually what it isn't is in the formal financial economy, right? So how do we support people who have that entrepreneurial spirit, who are able to show that actually they know how a business works, and that they've got a market, and that they've got the ability to be able to deliver to that market because they're selling. How do we ensure that we're able to support them in an ecosystem that allows them to be able to keep that authenticity of what it is that they're delivering, but providing that infrastructure? I think that's a challenge. And how do we get them to the scale where they can apply for funding, because they're so far removed from that process? How do we ensure that we're able to reach communities where they are at, provide that infrastructure support, and those that want to scale and want to get to another level have the access where they need it?
No, absolutely. Thank you. Amy, could you share your views on that, please?
Yeah, I was just, well, I was making, actually talking, I've stopped making notes now. I'm going to give a specific example. And again, this is me pushing myself to always try and showcase, people who are doing real things. So there's an organisation, and I think, Georgina, you've worked with Canera as well. So Canera is a social enterprise that works in the housing and homelessness sector. It was one of our first investments. So Maria Morgan, who's the CEO and founder, took a chance on us, I think, in terms of taking on social investment from somebody who's met. And I was honest that it was one of our first ones, so she was taking a chance with us. But what I've seen from Maria, it's all women-led, all Black and global majority women-led organisation, and they have experienced and I'm seeing this across the portfolio, I think they have experienced many more barriers than other social entrepreneurs because of lack of networks, lack of people trusting them, lack of being empowered with knowledge and those sorts of things. And I think that in terms of like the sort of power and resilience that takes then to hold firm, hold true. And in Maria's case, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, I remember this really powerful moment of where a potential customer was offering a contract that was well underpriced, and she had to stand firm and say, no, I'm worth more than this. And so she turned it down. So they didn't get that contract. They gave it to somebody else. Well, about 6 months later, they came back and said, well, it didn't go so well with the other organisation. And so they were coming back to her. So I do kind of feel like, when you sort of come across those things, and just to add to that as another concrete example, when we've looked at our portfolio, the best repayments, the soonest repayments have come from Black-led or global majority-led, women-led organisations. So from a social finance point of view, actually, these organisations are lower risk, they're better performers, but we haven't unpicked as to exactly why that's happening, but potentially it's happening because they've experienced more barriers that they've had to overcome and innovate and stand firm. So, yeah, we're seeing really good examples of this.
Amazing, thank you. I think, speaking as a Black female entrepreneur, I think one of the reasons that we pay back as quickly as possible as well is because we don't like debt. So
That's
we want to
what
get,
yeah,
we don't like debt. We weren't raised to have it. Our parents were really averse to it. So we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible because it does feel like a heavy weight to many of us. But Georgina, can I get you to close off your thoughts on this question, please?
Yeah, really interesting conversations happening already around this topic. And just to add a follow-on to what you'd mentioned, Amy, is that statistically, Black global majority women are more successful in business. So in Eric Collins' book, We Don't Need Permission, you know, they did lots of research around that, and actually we are the most successful. So again, it goes back to these systemic barriers, and maybe what will happen if Black women rule the world, or you know, but there's something to think about around that. So also going back to what you had mentioned, Muna, around what it is that we're sort of aspiring to be, and how we can kind of look at, you know, where is it we want to go and how is it that we want to scale, and maybe put in something tangible towards that. We launched our Challenge X2 within our organisation, which is about doubling the revenue of 2030 businesses by 2030 and bringing £50 million into the Black economy. Ambitious, you know, ambitious, but when you look at the numbers, it's pretty easy. And it's about shifting the way that we think about things as well. And we, the lovely Amy, because she is absolutely fantastic, and everything that you'd mentioned, I was like, yes, yes, yes. Behind the scenes, I'm like, Amy is like my ambassador in everything. I think I get a connection almost every single week from Amy, and I don't think I have seen that level of genuine care from any other ally, with no sense of like wanting to take any of the credit and continuously pushing it back to us. No, let Bud be at the forefront. No, don't mention us. You know, you have the branding, you do this. So we're also working on a project together called Beyond Barriers, which is about us working with Sumerian and partners with Amy to help us to, number one, become a potential social investor, an intermediary, but also to work alongside the Black and global majority businesses that don't have access to all of these opportunities, and for them to see people that look like them continue that relationship rather than just the capacity building element that we offer. So I say all of this to bring me back to this point when we had our first onboarding session with some of the participants, and we'd mentioned Challenge X2 to them. And you know, quite often, as I said before, it's this kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is possible, you know, I'm not sure, I'm just trying to make it through, you know, I'm just trying to feed my family. But the thing that really stood out to me is a lot of the participants were like, no, 2030, no, we're doing this like next year. I'm doubling my revenue next year, you know, and I'm going for that. So I think the appetite and the hunger and the belief just was, I was like, yeah, let's do it, let's go. But there's so many other things. There is like, okay, well, let's look at your books, you know, let's get into some of the real stuff. But I think everything starts in the mind, everything starts from that belief, and to hear that and to feel that like really warms my heart. So yeah, that's something that really inspired me actually from our onboarding call.
Amazing.
Grace, before you move on, that actually brings us back to the original question. Because what you just described there, Georgina, and it's being facilitated by Sumerian and Amy, is that power piece, right? So recognizing that actually if we hand over the power, it has more ability to be able to affect our communities, and that getting away from that credibility gap that always sits with Black and minorities. So, yeah, love it.
Thank you. So this to Muna and Georgina, how do you personally stand firm in your leadership when navigating predominantly white financial and policy spaces? And I'll give that to Georgina.
It's such an interesting thing, because when I know that I'm going to be in a space where it's just going to be me, I kind of prepare myself, and it's quite sad that I have to do that, but I genuinely do. And I do that because I recognize that I have a responsibility. I shouldn't have it, but I do. And I feel that it's very important for me to show up and to say the right things and to stand firm. And I've had many situations where I have argued and argued and argued for access to more things. One of which reminds me of in Tulse Hill in South London. I wanted for us to have a market where predominantly the vendors would be Black, and everybody said no. And I was like, no, we are having this market because this is not just about you guys, this is about our community. And I just stood firm, and I was like, no, and I gave all my points, and I had to do my research, and I had to, present all of my evidence. And we had that market, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was fantastic. But there's something about kind of like, you got to kind of gird yourself up. So it feels like you're going to war.
Yeah. Which
again, it shouldn't feel that way, but it's something I do almost every day. In the spheres that I am, and I do feel very privileged to be able to be invited to the table, because often we're not. And so I don't take it lightly, and I prepare myself, and I just, in that, standing, even if I get knocked back, I'm like, I'm coming again, again. I'm not taking no for an answer, because it's bigger than me. This is not about me as an individual person. This is about, change. This is about changing the system. This is about changing the lack of access and creating more access for more people that look like me. So yeah, it's a fight. So I think it's more than standing. I think it's actually like, okay, like if we need to go to war, we're going to go to war. But I'll still be your friend. We'll still smile. We'll still, I'll still, build good relationships. But I will say, actually, no, I don't think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everything you said really resonates. It does feel like a constant battle, and sometimes it can be disheartening, and you can feel like, what is the point? But we do need to just keep going, because at some point there will be a breakthrough, and I think that's so, so important. So thank you for that. Muna, what are your thoughts?
I think that getting yourself prepared is a given. I think we do it without even realizing. It's because you're so used to it. But for me, I think the biggest thing is around that responsibility piece. So even if I'm not feeling up to it, even if I'm having a bad day, even if I'm like, you know what, I shouldn't have to explain myself 10 times, I'm still going to do it because I'm responsible to others as part of that process. But one of the things that always gets me is actually when I was 20 and I first came into finance, and thinking back to that young woman who actually kept on showing up and kept on standing firm, and actually what it would have been like to see more representation when I was that age and in that position, and the responsibility that comes from, well, now you are being invited to those spaces, you better show up, and you better make sure that you're opening the doors, because there'll be a million others that are in that same headspace that you were at 20 years old, having those same thoughts. And it's about ensuring that we show up, we over prepare. I tend to over prepare because I realize that I will probably be questioned more than others around the table. So I make sure I know my stuff, and be prepared to stand firm, and be prepared to actually respectfully disagree. Because I think sometimes people expect us to be agreeable, And it happens as women as well, right? We're always meant to be agreeable. We're always meant to kind of like make things go away. But actually, respectfully recognizing that if you believe in something and you know you've got your facts right, being prepared to stand by it. And I think that's what's got me through some very difficult conversations. And I like Georgina's point around just not giving up. Like, I'm very persistent.
Thank you. I think persistence should be just in the dictionary definition. There should be a picture of Black woman because we are persistent. Amy, from your perspective inside the investment and finance world, what would a truly inclusive financial system look like? What structural changes are non-negotiable for you?
Yeah, there is a lot of work going on at the moment, having these sorts of conversations within impact investing and social finance. One of the things that is being reinvigorated now is the diversity forum, if you've come across that, which I think is, it's an important step. But if I'm thinking about like truly inclusive financial system, I think I'm thinking about something that's quite different to what we've got now. Because at the moment, we're getting a sense of the need for accountability, representation, these sorts of things, but we definitely have to have a system where we're not sort of adding these things on at the end or adding them up in at a certain point in the process. It needs to be in every single little bit of the process and policies and everything. It's truly embedded such that each part of it is inclusive. That's a real, that's where we are now, like, where you get these blockers, you sort of go, well, that's the system. But we've sort of done that without thinking because we've adopted other systems which historically haven't worked for these groups. So why are we perpetuating that? We need to just start again. Well, not start again. It's not to say that it's all not right, but we need to take a close look at every single part. And I think that the key thing around there is around, we mentioned mindset. That's two ways. It's not, we shouldn't be asking other people to change their mindset. We should be changing our mindset, or we should at least be coming to some sort of like acceptance and inclusivity around mindset, culture, behaviours, those sorts of things. So I think a lot of the work has to be done on the side of the social investment. It's not the work still needing to be done on the side of the entrepreneur. So if I was to give an example of where I think a truly inclusive financial system would be, I think it's going to be much more in the community. I would like to see a system where if you are looking at finance or wanting to have knowledge, you can sit down with somebody in your community and sit opposite them and eyeball them. It's a more efficient way of doing business than where we are now, where there's all these barriers. You have to go through all these hoops, and so you sort of lose it quite early on. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we can do, and to me that is a huge opportunity because there's a huge market here that's not being served. So I view it as a positive thing.
No, definitely. Thank you, Amy. So Muna and Georgina, if you could redesign the social finance system from scratch with inclusion at its heart, what would be the first 3 principles that you'd build into it? Muna, I can get you to start, please.
There's 3 principles. I think number 1, I think it would be that point that Amy's just made around, actually we're not just adding on, building on, tinkering around the edges. So for me, the first principle would be to have a commitment to reevaluation of everything in terms of what needs to be changed and kind of looked at. And so that openness to being able to reevaluate and dismantle if necessary and rebuild, I think is that mindset thing, and that mindset that it's not working, and therefore we have to ensure that we come to a point where if it means rebuilding, we rebuild. I think for me, the other key point around that is accountability. Like if we say that we are serving this market and we are going to be having this initiative, we need to think about what makes institutions do that. So is that regulatory? Is it quotas? Until we get that mindset shift and until we get that whole reevaluation, sometimes people don't like it, but a quota helps, right? And forcing people to do something means that it gets done, as opposed to having a conversation and then leaving it on the shelf until the next conversation. So I think there is something around that accountability for me. And then I think the last one is around that power shift. So not hoarding power, and therefore finance, if it's going to have an impact in our communities, has to be held by our communities.
Yeah.
It has to have a generational legacy within our communities, and therefore we can't just be expected to be an add-on in part of a system that wasn't built for us. So we now have the opportunity to build those systems, and that includes holding the money.
No, absolutely. Georgina?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of that legacy piece and power, I've got 3 points, and one of which is around that representation, exactly what you mentioned, Muna. And it's really interesting because we were talking a bit about this in one of the recent meetings that we had, and the importance of representation, and some people were saying that they didn't feel that it was important and all of that sort of thing. And I was just like, that's because you just don't understand. That's just because you haven't got the lived experience. And when you talk about representation, it's about the lived experience. It's not just, just to have somebody that looks like me talk to me. It's about someone that's been through what I've been through and has faced those same challenges. But also, when I talk about representation, I would love for there to be those that are Black and representing the kind of financial institutions and different models that are out there, but actually that are also educating, which is the second piece, educating our community in a way that says, okay, this is how we leverage this stuff. This is how you really go and ask what you need. Here's the financial model that's going to help you to build a legacy for your children's children. And this is how I've done it. And this is how it's done. So there's the representation, there's the education. And then you mentioned, Muna, about, the starting points. I think we should have some reparations. We should have a big chunk of money to say, right, you've been extracted from for years. Here you go. Here's the starting point. And this is all for you to have within your community, to use within your community, to recycle within your community. And let's go.
Amazing. I love all of that. Thank you, ladies. So where do you, this is to all of you, where do you see the biggest opportunities right now to accelerate progress, whether that's policy change, sector initiatives, or cross-sector collaborations? And I'll start with you, please, Amy.
I think there's loads of opportunities. I'll pick out one. I'm kind of referring back to something we've already talked about, but the work that Georgina referenced that we're doing together called Beyond Barriers, that's 3 funders coming together, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, Trust for London and City Bridge Foundation. And I guess because we've been working on it, we've kind of taken it for granted. But when I talk in the sector, everybody's like, how did you get 3 funders to collaborate to do this? Well, I mean, I think that could be like, a really big opportunity for funders to come together and to pass over power to organisations like Bud Leaders. Because if you build Bud Leaders, we're doing work for them then. It's about that sort of passing over, collaborating and passing over the power. Once you sort of get those things set up, then the opportunities are huge, really, to replicate that model and to keep doing that. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening, but essentially collaboration, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Muna, what are your thoughts?
So that collaboration piece, I think, is really important. I've referenced equity in finance, which for us is a flagship labour of love, because obviously we've been delivering support for Black, minoritized and diverse ethnic communities for over 20 years. One of the things that's always got to me, and I've said to you, Grace, I think in our other conversation, it's always pulled at me that the people that most need our support look and sound like me. That is cyclical, like it doesn't change generation by generation. And so this piece of work where we're bringing together financial services to come and collaborate with our communities to start thinking about how do we lift some of those barriers. And we're looking at two key areas. So product and design. So how do we have proper lived experience in that product and design, and representation? Because without representation, you're not changing anything, right? So, and thinking about representation from a leadership deficit. So it's great to have people coming into the sector, and you have great initiatives, they cycle in and out for 2 years, but if you don't have people in compliance, risk, C-suite, regulatory, policy making, you're not going to make the changes that are required over the long term. So, we're super excited to have a cross-representation of financial services on our stakeholder advisory. We'd love to have conversations with others who want to get involved in this work, and I think social finance probably should be part of that conversation. We'd love to be able to have further conversations around that. But I think that collaboration piece, that we all have a stake and we all have a duty and a responsibility, means that it can't be done by one organisation. And we have that, exactly that, funders coming together and funding this piece of work. We don't normally work with each other, but I think that's the way forward to ensure that we kind of meet the needs of our communities.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Muna. Georgina.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both of you in terms of that collaboration piece. And I'll go even further to say that in that collaboration, there is that bit about shifting power and being happy to shift power and recognizing that there's an actual need to shift power if change is possible. Otherwise, it's just the status quo. And, you know, just continuing the work that that Amy mentioned that we're doing together, I think creating more community-based organisations that can do this work across the UK is an ambition that we want to see. Again, we're always thinking big picture. It's never, you know, it's never really about us as individuals. It's like, how can we create a model that is replicable, but not just like, here's a nice thing that you can download off our website. No, let's work together. Let's sit down. Let's ensure that you have everything that you need to be able to do this in your community. And I think that's how we're going to really see the change that's possible, and it is possible. You can see that, you know, this is our opportune moment, I would say. Despite the barriers that are there's still some great things that are happening, and we need to kind of jump on it and do some stuff now. Yeah,
definitely. I think also increasing the visibility of the great stuff that's happening as well, I think is so important, because those learnings need to be shared. And I think sometimes we're just not seeing what's happening. So just more of that visibility would be really impactful. So we're going to close off with a final question. And this is to all of you. If you could challenge everyone listening to this conversation who's in the finance and social impact space to take one concrete action to help close the financial equity gap for Black communities, what would it be? And I'll start with you, please, Muna.
One thing, I've got quite a few, but I'll have to bring it down to one. I think it's that point around shifting power. So if you haven't had any thoughts around how you or your organization can start that process, I think thinking seriously around where you need to be looking at who's doing what, how you can start those conversations. And I think until you start thinking in the terms of shifting power and not just giving out grants and not just continuing the status quo, you are not going to have the change that we're talking about, certainly on this call, but actually the community is looking for, our times need, and unless we do it, nobody's going to get it done. So I think it's about what role do you play and how do you start thinking about shifting that power.
Amazing, thank you. Some really, really key things there highlighted. Amy, over to you.
I'll just build on what Mona just said. I think if you want to do like one concrete thing, then I'd find yourself a critical friend. Like just find somebody who you trust, sort of challenge you and point out where you're making a mistake, and just get them to be super honest with you. So you could do like have a think about, and if you're somebody who feels like you haven't got any power and you haven't got to say, well, we've all got one little thing that we could share. So work out what is that thing that you have, your resource, and find somebody who can partner with and share that with. It's taking that one first step, and it's kind of just opens doors.
Amazing, thank you, Amy. And Georgina?
Yeah, I think we all just like had a really good conversation, decided to say the same things, but mine is along the same vein. It's really about taking action and thinking about, what is it that I'm going to do personally to create more access, and not to just think about things. So I think we talk a lot, we think a lot. What are we actually going to do to create more access? And what does that mean in terms of me letting go of some of the power that I might have? And that's that's more of a conversation to have with yourself, but to then take action on that.
Amazing, thank you. So really, really powerful takeaways, I think, for anyone listening to this conversation. So I want to just massively thank you all for joining this afternoon.